handout covering research on about 18 different nutritional dietary interventions that have reasonable amount of research behind them. And so I'll go over some of these with you. Picture of myself with my daughter, Kim. And so this is, each one of these recommendations has been reviewed by someone, another medical or scientific expert. It's an official publication of the Autism Research Institute and available for free. Our philosophy has been very simple, listening to people with autism and their parents, find out what treatments seem to be working, get feedback from physicians, and then look at the research that's out there, and to try to focus on what is the underlying biomedical problem rather than just trying to treat the symptom. So really looking at whole body support of natural function as much as possible, treating GI issues, nutritional support, removing toxins. And I think other people have mentioned this as well, but it's important to just say biomedical therapy by itself may be able to make you better able to learn, but then you need to add in a lot of therapies to help promote language and learning, social interaction as well. A quote by Bernie Rimland many years ago. This is an incredibly radical statement to make, and he was criticized for it, but more and more there's evidence that many children with autism can improve substantially, but it's a different treatment often for each individual. So what happens helps one of your friends may not help another. So I'll try to put all that together. Here's a list of the different treatments that are covered in the handout and roughly the order in which we recommend proceeding, starting at the top and going down. But again, based on the individual, based on working with a physician, certainly makes sense to change those. So I'll cover about the first half or so of these treatments. So the thing that many people forget, but I think is really the foundation of starting, is making sure that the child is on a healthy diet. And what do we mean by that? Very clearly, 3 to 4 servings a day of nutritious vegetables. I'm sorry, French fries and ketchup don't really cut it as vegetables. And some amount of fruit, 1 to 2 servings of fruit, and varying what those are, and especially getting some leafy greens in there. At least 1 to 2 servings a day of protein. Just in basic evaluations, we see some children who just don't get enough protein, and that's an essential nutrient. Getting rid of added sugar. Saw one little boy who had multiple aggressive incidents each day, finally broke his he was in preschool and punched one of his therapists and broke their nose. When they took away his 2 sodas and his candy bar, he actually became a much better child, just modulating the blood sugar. It really is that simple. Having dramatic rises and falls in blood sugar will cause a lot of behavioral problems. Removing junk food that add extra calories but don't have other benefit. Avoiding fried foods and foods containing trans fats. We've been saying this for years. So glad to see the FDA finally agrees with us and is removing trans fats. Avoiding artificial colors, flavors, and preservatives. One woman I know in adulthood had seizures much of her life. When she removed artificial colors, she was fine until one day she had a margarita with a little bit of green dye in it, had a seizure, and since then has been seizure-free. Someone else I know had severe migraines, just avoiding animal protein, and they've been fine since then. So it's different sensitivities for different people, but it's really surprising how much an effect. Usually, so just avoiding those components. If possible, eating organic foods because they don't contain pesticides. Pesticides are great at killing bugs, primarily by attacking their nervous system and inducing seizures in those animals. Why in the world would you want to consume something that attacks the nervous system, is designed to attack the nervous system of animals? And unfortunately, we have very similar nervous systems. And so since we know, heard the nice presentation by Dr. Go, that a large number of children with autism have seizures and many more have subclinical seizures. Again, just avoiding pesticides. There's good research on this that increased pesticide exposure is a risk factor for autism. Just avoiding those. But if you can't go all organic, then just washing the fruit and vegetables peeling the outside can help. I'm going to share with you some survey data from ARI. Autism Research Institute has collected data from about 26,000 families, and they find that removing sugar very rarely worsens a child, and about half the time helps. And that was reported from 3,700 families. Fine-goal diet, avoiding artificial colors, flavors, preservatives, again, helps about half the time. So benefits of improving the diet: vegetables and fruits are one of the main sources of vitamins and minerals and essential phytonutrients that you can't just get from most packaged vitamin mineral supplements. So that's important. Protein is the building block for amino acids. So much of your body is made of protein. You need to consume protein, either animal or vegetable protein. What your digestive system does is chop the long protein molecules into individual amino acids and then reassembles them to make everything from neurotransmitters to hormones to muscles in your body. So if you're not getting enough protein, you're not going to be able to produce enough of those key parts of your body. I talked about problems with sugar intake and rapid rises and falls in blood sugar. Drinking orange juice is going to produce a much more rapid rise and fall in blood sugar than eating an orange, because that orange has a lot of fiber in it, which will slow absorption and slow rise and fall of blood sugar. Talked about problems with pesticides. It's a very nice large study on artificial colors and preservatives, where they gave it to typical children in school. Half the children received it, half did not. And it's very clear in many children, they're just sensitive to artificial colors and flavors at the levels present in your typical foods, in your Captain Crunch cereal and your Hawaiian Punch. So just avoiding those seems to help a significant number of children. So now I'm going to switch to a second topic, closely related, food sensitivities. A lot of children may not have a full-blown allergy, but might be sensitive to a food. So good clues are looking for red cheeks, red ears, dark circles under the eyes, looking for changes in behavior. A diet log is probably one of the best ways to identify food problems. Just for a week or so, write down every food a child is having and then see if they're having a worsening of behavior, a meltdown, 1, 2, or 3 days after the food. It may be a day after, it could be up to 2 to 3 days after. There is blood testing available, but it's very controversial. IgE tells you about an immediate reaction. Relatively rare. Kids with autism have high amounts of IgE, but some will. And so that's fairly conclusive. But IgG tends to be a more delayed reaction. Most immunologists would tell you that it's not indicative of food sensitivity. However, a lot of physicians will use it because it may give you some guidance as to foods that may be a problem. So just because you have an IgG reaction to a food doesn't mean it is a problem, but it's a clue it might be a problem. The gold standard, according to many top immunologists and the American Association of Immunologists, is an elimination diet. To simply remove foods that you think are suspicious, that you think you might have a problem with. The 10 most common ones are the ones listed here: gluten, dairy, sugar, corn, soy, yeast, peanuts, eggs, artificial colors, artificial preservatives. Just remove those and see if symptoms improve. If they improve, then add them back one at a time every 3 to 4 days and see if the symptom comes back. That's the gold standard immunologists use to determine if there is a food sensitivity. And so just avoiding these foods can benefit a wide range of problems. Doris Rapp has done some nice articles and books on this. It's important to know that in the general US population, a huge study of 40,000 children found 8% had food allergies, primarily to peanuts, but also to milk and shellfish. And these food allergies are growing. They're becoming more common. And so it's important to be aware of those in the general population. And I'll show you some research in a moment that kids with autism are more likely to have these. So some ARI survey data. testing for food allergies and removing them seems to often help. A rotation diet. Humans grew up developed historically as hunters and gatherers. They ate what was in season. They ate what they could catch. They did not tend to eat the same thing every breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So the foods you eat every single day are the ones you are most likely to become allergic to. And so varying your diet is a good thing to do. Rotating your diet so you don't eat the same food more than every 4 days or so seems to help some individuals. Sad to say, chocolate is a problem. And so cutting out chocolate for about half of people seems to be beneficial. Could be the sugar, could be the milk. Removing eggs. Eggs are a great source of protein, but are a problem for a number of people. So again, trying to remove those for some individuals can help. There's a nice study by Vajani showing that many children with autism have increased immune responses. Several studies by Giannucci finding the same thing, that children with autism had more hypersensitivities to food allergens than did typical children, and that seemed to be associated with gut problems, which is what we found in a most recent study too. There are several other studies I'll just briefly mention. Lucarelli did an 8-week diet treatment in which they avoided foods that they had been tested to be allergic to and found benefits in an open label study. Kushak and Bowie at Harvard Medical School did some really nice work on digestive enzymes. They looked at digestive enzymes in 199 children with autism as part of an endoscopy. So if you're going to do a GI workup on your child, most labs nowadays can also do a measurement of digestive enzyme output. So request that if you do an endoscopy. What they found is that many children with autism had decreased digestive enzymes for complex sugars, especially for lactose, the sugar in milk. So that's one of the reasons why milk is a problem. And many studies by Horvath, Bowie, and others showing inflammation is common in children with autism. When you have inflammation, when there are gaps between the cells in the GI tract, then more food or partly digested food can leach out of the GI tract into the body. So the protein, which is usually what the body's immune system reacts to, if the protein isn't digested into individual amino acids in the digestive tract, but if some of those proteins or part of the proteins called peptides leak through a damaged GI tract into the body, then that's a problem. So when a child has many reactions, many food allergies, it's probably not an altered immune system. It's probably due to a leaky gut, we suspect. This is a hypothesis. But it seems that if you can treat the gut, then a lot of those food allergies will disappear because then the partly digested food won't leach back into the body and cause the immune reaction. There's some studies by Magistris, recent very nice study of 162 kids with autism showing that IgG response to gliadin, which is related to gluten, was increased in children with autism and some controls, but only 2 children with autism had full-blown celiac disease. So again, most kids with autism do not have celiac disease, but many of them have a sensitivity to gluten. Similar to milk, IgE increased in 18% of kids with autism, only 5% of controls. So even some controls, especially if you're not of Northern European extraction, more sensitive to milk products. And in this study, they found that, as I mentioned, intestinal permeability was increased in about 1/4 of kids with autism. So third treatment. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. Is everyone still with me? Some of this I'm hoping is familiar to you, but I think it's good to go over the basics first. A gluten-free, casein-free diet that's often corn-free and soy-free too. Most corn and soy in this country is now GMO, and one of the problems with that is that they're usually genetically modified to increase the amount of pesticides that can be put on those foods, and so those foods have higher amount of pesticides on them. But just historically, if you think about it, human digestive systems have not evolved in a diet containing high amounts of wheat and dairy. And wheat, in the last several hundred years, has been altered. It's been bred to specifically increase the gluten content so that your pizza dough is stickier, so your bread is stickier. Bread today is very different than it was several hundred years ago. And because of that, then people are going to have a greater sensitivity to gluten because there's a higher amount in diet than there was a few hundred years ago. The issue with dairy products is, if you think about it, we are the only mammal on the planet to consume milk from another mammal. That's a very strange behavior. Imagine if you saw a dog going up and suckling from a cat. Wouldn't that seem like a weird behavior? But basically, every time you're drinking a glass of milk, you're going up and suckling from a cow. But not only do we do it from another species, what's so strange is we consume milk past the age of weaning. All right? We are the only mammal on the planet to consume dairy products past the age of weaning. It's a very abnormal behavior. Mother's milk is a wonderful thing. There are special ingredients in mother's milk which are very beneficial for your gut bacteria. I could go into more detail if we had time. And so breastfeeding from a human mother is a wonderful thing to do, but after age of weaning, it's a very odd behavior. So one of the problems is just allergic response. Some of the problem is the peptides in the gluten and casein may bind to opioid-like receptors in the brain. The research on this is somewhat unclear. But if you think about it, it makes tremendous sense. What is absolutely critical for a human infant to do? After they nurse, they go into a drug-induced sleep because the peptides in there latch into the opioid receptor of their brain. And when they wake up, they want more of their favorite drug, mother's milk. We want them to be addicted to mother's milk. There's a very good rationale for that. It's essential for them to survive. If they didn't like mother's milk, they wouldn't live. So we have been bred over millions of years to have the infants very much want mother's milk. So there's a lot of good rationale for that. For many children with autism, when they go on a dairy-free diet, we see that they seem less zoned out and more with it. Also, I mentioned the problem of lactose just not being well digested. And so there are multiple issues. It could be one, it could be two, it could be multiple of these issues that seem to relate to why gluten and casein and sometimes corn and soy are problematic for kids with autism. So treatment is very simple. Don't bother doing a test because the tests are not nearly as reliable as just doing a total 100% elimination. In my experience, about a third of individuals don't seem to benefit, but about 2/3 do seem to benefit. But you really have to have 100% avoidance. Seen with my daughter, just a small infraction, a bite of a cookie, is enough to cause a behavioral problem for a day or two. You can use digestive enzymes if there's an accidental exposure, but you shouldn't rely on them. That's like letting the snake bite you and then taking the snake bite medicine afterwards. Why consume a poisonous substance? So think of these substances as a poison for your child until proven otherwise. So try the diet. Usually within a week, we see improvements on dairy, but try it for at least a month to be sure. With gluten, usually up to about 3 months, but usually you see benefits sooner. The survey data shows about half benefit from casein removal, half from gluten removal, 2/3 by removing both. This is one of the places I want to make a few safety hints. Most of what I'm recommending is very safe, very rare risk of adverse effect, but there have been a number of studies showing, several studies showing that children with autism tend to have lower calcium density in their bone, and although you can get a lot of calcium from your vegetables, some kids not eating their vegetables, dairy can be a major source. So do check that you're getting a good calcium supplement if you're going dairy-free. Research on the diet is somewhat mixed. There were some small single studies open label studies by Reichelt showing benefit, a single blind study with 10 children. Then there was a negative study, 12-week double-blind crossover study, but only 15 children. And the researchers mentioned that the parents said there were benefits, but their testing techniques were not good enough to really assess those benefits. But then there was a larger study, and instead of 12 weeks, it was 12 months. Instead of 15 children, it had 55 children. And they did find significant improvements in communication on the ADOS, significant improvements in social interaction, in attention, hyperactivity, and daily living skills. It's not huge, it's not a cure for most kids, but it's a little bit of a help. On average, each of these treatments I'm talking about seems to help a little bit. Some treatments help some children more than others. Cade did a study with 150 children, finding that many had antibodies to gluten, and they seemed to benefit after 3 months and perhaps benefit even more after 12 months. Again, there are tests, but a trial of food really seems to be the best test. There are a number of other diets to consider as well. Most of them, unfortunately, like GAPS and SCD, don't have much research behind them, but I'll just let you know that they are out there and you can consider them. Hopefully there will be more research on them because I think they're promising. All right, next treatment I'm going to talk about. Again, I hope I'm not going too fast, but vitamins and minerals. This is just basic nutrition. If you take a college nutrition class, it's one of the first things they'll talk about. And what people forget, because vitamins and minerals have been around so long, some physicians just poo-poo them. Oh, how important can that be? Absolutely vital. The definition of a vitamin or mineral is a substance in your body, a substance you have to consume in your diet. Your body cannot make it, and if you don't consume it, you will develop a serious disease or you will die. That is the definition of a vitamin or mineral. Most Americans are low in one or more vitamins or minerals. So for example, up to half of women have low iron because of their monthly cycle. Many women are also low in calcium. Some men are too, resulting in osteoporosis. So these are common nutritional deficiencies. The U.S. National Health, the NHANES report estimates, for example, people consume only half of the RDA of zinc. So I could go on and on through all the vitamins and minerals. But the bottom line is most people on the standard American diet, and standard American diet stands for SAD, okay? Just not getting enough fruits and vegetables. It's really the biggest issue. Usually plenty of protein, but not enough fruits and vegetables. Those are the best sources of vitamins and minerals. So I won't go through each one, but you can see for vitamins and minerals, very rare adverse effects, usually half the time some good benefit. Now I think I forgot to mention at the beginning of my talk, and I apologize, I am the president of the Autism Nutrition Research Center. It's a nonprofit I founded to get information out to families on nutritional interventions for autism, and we produce a vitamin mineral supplement based on my research, but I want to let you know I don't receive any royalties or payments. I work as a volunteer, so I don't get any salary, so I don't think I have any significant conflict of interest, but I just want to put that out there. So we conducted the first double-blind, placebo-controlled study of a balanced vitamin mineral supplement for kids with autism, and we found some significant benefits in sleep and gut function and some other improvements in other areas that weren't quite significant. Another group did a study of just high-dose vitamin C, very high dose. They found some benefit. It's actually, vitamin C is needed among many functions for neurotransmitter production. There have been several studies, now quite a few, showing that children with autism have increased oxidative stress. And using antioxidants is probably one of the best ways to treat those issues. We did a 12-month treatment study. This is a very large study of 141 children and adults with autism. That's one of the larger treatment studies out there, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled. I don't have time to go into it, but we measured many abnormalities in vitamin levels, in mineral levels, glutathione, methylation problems, oxidative stress, sulfation problems, problems with all of the 6 major neurotransmitters we looked at, dopamine, serotonin, etc. All of these abnormalities were correlated with severity of autism. The worse these nutritional deficiencies, the worse the problems of autism. And the bottom line is the vitamin mineral supplement either improved or normalized almost every one of these conditions. So we measured many things. I don't have time to go into detail. But I'll just show you a chart. So this is a chart of symptoms using a Parent Global Impression Scale. A 0 is no change, a 1 is slightly better, a 2 is better. And it goes negative too. And what we found is in the placebo group in blue, this placebo is great stuff. Boy, this placebo improved expressive language. It improved receptive language and play and cognition. That's why it's so important to do a placebo-controlled study, because you have so much hope, especially when you're faced with a potentially lifelong disorder, that unless almost any open label study of anything is going to show some degree of benefit. But look at what's in red, and what's in red is the treatment group. And the treatment group did better in every category, and several of those were statistically significant. So what we can say is that about a third of the kids and adults did not have significant benefit from this vitamin mineral supplement. About a third had some, and a third really took off and did very, very well. We could now predict, based on the measurements we do, if we do $1,000 worth of measurements, we can predict pretty accurately who's going to benefit, or you can spend $50 on a vitamin mineral supplement and get a better test by just giving it to your child. So that's what we recommend. Vegetable juicing, one of the best ways to get vegetables and fruits into a child is just by putting them in a blender and grinding them to a very fine paste, putting in more fruit juice to begin with to make it taste better, but fading it back. It should be roughly 2/3 vegetables, 1/3 fruit juice. You want to keep all the fiber, because that fiber is so important to the gut bacteria. So you don't want to use a juicer that removes the fiber. You want to use a blender that grinds it up but preserves all the fiber. You might need to add some extra water so it's not too thick. But some of the healthiest vegetables to consume: cabbage, spinach, carrots, broccoli, parsley, oregano, and then mixed with your favorite fruits. Going organic, of course, as you can, is just the easiest way and probably one of the best ways to get good nutrition into your child. So that will help a lot, but it sometimes isn't enough, and that's when you should consider also a vitamin mineral supplement for most kids. There have been over 20 studies on very high dose vitamin B6 and magnesium. When I say very high dose, I mean these studies did roughly 100 to 1,000 times the RDA. This is very high dose. And in all these studies, it was generally each cell in your body. The membrane of that cell is composed of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. And it's the ratio of those that determines how rigid or how flexible that membrane is. You want the right balance of omega-3 and omega-6. Roughly 20% of an infant's brain is composed of these essential fatty acids. Mother's milk, very rich in these omega-3 fatty acids, and that may be part of the reason for postpartum depression, because the mother's body during pregnancy and nursing gives up those omega-3 fatty acids to the infant. But unfortunately, there are still a few infant formulas out there that lack this ingredient. Mother's milk is best, but if you can't get it, use an infant formula that has DHA in it. The two major categories are omega-3 and omega-6. Most people in the US get plenty of omega-6. Probably one of the best sources is olive oil. But omega-3s, unfortunately, are very limited in today's commercial foods. Omega-3s have very short shelf lives. So commercial food processors, in order to make sure those Twinkies can sit on the shelf for 6 months, hydrogenate or partially hydrogenate or bleach or deodorize. They destroy the omega-3 fatty acids so that they're no longer there. So it's estimated roughly 80% of the US population has low levels of omega-3 fatty acids. And this is probably one of the most widespread nutrition problems in the US. And I can say that clearly because what's the number one killer in the US? Heart disease. What is the number one nutritional intervention to prevent heart disease? Omega-3 fatty acids. Okay, it's that simple. So low levels of omega-3 fatty acids are associated with most psychiatric disorders, depression, postpartum depression, bipolar, Rett syndrome, and others. There are 4 published studies and now a meta-analysis showing that kids with autism have generally lower levels of omega-3 fatty acids than the general population who have low levels to begin with. And there are now quite a few studies, and there are also just a meta-analysis came out of several studies showing that omega-3 fatty acids seem to help. But this is the big mistake that most people have made. Some of these studies were done with most of these studies were done with low doses of omega-3 fatty acids. And they seem to be using too low a dose. For heart disease, you're using of order 4 grams a day of omega-3 fatty acids. And for most of these studies, they're using well less than 1 gram or even half a gram a day. So the reason why many of these studies for autism are showing just marginal, slight benefit is because you're using too little a dose. If you have a headache and you give someone 1/10 of an aspirin pill, do you think it's going to help very much? No, but that's effectively what these studies are doing. So in a study we did, we used a much higher dose. We used 2 to 3 grams a day, and we found a better benefit than the other studies. There is testing you can do. You can spend several $100s to measure your levels of omega-3 fatty acids, but why bother? There's a very simple thing you can do. You can just ask yourself, does my child get at least 1 serving of seafood a week, and preferably 2, and preferably from an oily fish like salmon or anchovies or sardines? If they're not getting 1 to 2 servings a week, they're low in omega-3 fatty acids. Don't bother testing, just start taking them. It takes a long time to see a benefit. It takes about 4 months for omega-3 levels to reach their peak, and longer time than that to see a benefit, to see full benefit. Now there is a safety catch here I want to warn you about. There's a large study done by my friend at New York University. They treated roughly 400 children with autism with fish oil, and they found about 1 to 2% of the kids had a severe reaction to fish oil within a week or so. Their behavior got much worse. In all of those children, it was discovered it was due to a carnitine deficiency. Carnitine, we heard about earlier briefly, carries these fats into the mitochondria and removes waste fats from the mitochondria. So it's important. So if you are giving someone extra omega-3 fats or any fats, but they don't have enough carnitine, they will run into a problem. So that's why the vitamin mineral supplement we created has a little bit of carnitine in it, but much more is needed for full carnitine therapy. All right, now I'm going to move to next topic, gut problems. I'm going to talk about treatments other than fecal transplant, because you heard about that. This is just a study we did. First study showing gut problems correlated with autism severity. So the blue are the kids with autism who don't have significant GI problems. The red are the kids with autism who have GI problems. What you can see is they have worse speech problems, worse social problems, worse sensory and cognitive problems, and worse behavioral problems. It's very clear. Another much larger study found the same thing, found something very similar, that especially irritability was associated with GI issues. So what are treatments to consider? Simple testing to do is if your child has very loose stools or a lot of gas, especially after eating dairy products, then a digestive enzyme for those products, lactase, is probably a very good thing to consider. You can also, as I mentioned earlier, measure digestive enzymes during an endoscopy to see which ones are a problem. And so there are 3 major studies all showing kids with autism have problems with digesting certain starches and sugars. So avoiding those makes very good sense. But if you don't want to avoid them, consider digestive enzymes. There's an open label study showing some benefit. There's another study not showing much benefit. ARI survey data shows about half seem to benefit. Oh, sorry, that got shrunk a little bit. I'm not sure why. You probably can't read that, so I'll read it. So for treating GI issues, the first thing I recommend is just a stool analysis. A comprehensive digestive stool analysis is one approach to look for gut bacteria, to look for yeast. But these culture-based methods are very limited because today we can only culture about 50 of the 1,000 or so bacteria in our gut. So these culture-based tests miss 95% of the bacteria in your gut. So they're very limited. The commercial tests like we use for our research studies, the tests we use for our research studies are generally not commercially available yet. A visual test, I think, is the best test, just looking at your child's stool and smelling it. If it smells bad, if it looks strange color, if it's not well formed, then there's a problem. If they're not having a stool about once a day, and it could be even up to 3 times a day, once for each meal, that's reasonable. And also in some children, checking their levels of essential fatty acids. There was a study showing that for Crohn's disease, a very serious GI disorder, just giving fish oil for a year helped reduce the inflammation in that. So treatments to consider, you can try high-dose probiotics. There are 4 open-label studies showing very mixed or minimal results for most of the studies, but one study showed some benefit on GI symptoms with probiotics. Nystatin and diflucan are helpful at high doses for treating yeast infections, or perhaps just because they're anti-inflammatories. There are some non-prescription antifungals out there to consider, but also just going on a low-sugar diet, going on simple carbohydrates, good sense. Of course, my favorite is fecal transplant, but we're working on getting that available. But that's probably by far the most effective. But look at this data from ARI on antifungals. About half of kids benefit from those, more, by the way, than it's a better ratio than for any psychiatric medication. It's the highest rated prescription medication by ARI, higher rated than any psychiatric medication. But antibiotics, look at the rating there. According to 1,800 families, 31% of them said their child got worse on antibiotics, and only 12% of the time did they get better. Now again, it depends on which antibiotic you're using. So I'm not saying not to use them, I'm saying use them with great caution and with a physician who knows what they're doing. Okay, so moving on to amino acids. Amino acids come from protein. You need to consume enough protein, either animal or balanced plant protein, because the protein is what your body uses. But it's not enough to just consume the protein. Your digestive system has to be able to break it down into individual amino acids. So some children have a lack of amino acids because they are not eating enough protein. Some may have a digestive problem. Some could have both. There are some good tests out there. Again, it costs $100 or so, but you can use a fasting amino acid or a 24-hour urine. But the urine tests are a little trickier to assess. The treatments are just give more protein or use digestive enzymes, or you can use a customized amino acid. You can purchase amino acids that are free form. So rather than being a protein strand, they're the individual amino acids called free form. Those are highly digestible. You want to make sure it's a balanced blend of all the essential amino acids, but you can also get it customized for an individual. So you can do an amino acid test, and some labs will then recommend a customized amino acid. Surprisingly, in our vitamin mineral study, I was planning to follow that with an amino acid treatment study. But I found that after giving our vitamin mineral supplement, the amino acid levels largely normalized. So I didn't bother going on and doing an amino acid treatment study because it appeared that the vitamins and minerals probably were improving the absorption or digestion of amino acids so that there wasn't a need for it. We did a study. There's quite a few bad studies out there in amino acids because either they didn't have the people be fasting or they weren't comparing them against age-matched controls. So there are a lot of bad studies out there, but we did a study, which I think we did right, and we did find low levels of several important amino acids, including tryptophan, which is needed to make serotonin, and phenylalanine and tyrosine. So you can give your child an SSRI to artificially boost the level of serotonin in their body, or you can give them a vitamin mineral supplement so they can make their own serotonin. I'm biased. I prefer helping the body make its own because then it creates the right amount in most cases. All right, next. How am I doing on time? Wrap up? Okay, that's fine. So I'll skip this, and I'll skip this, and I'll just wrap up here. We put together, we did a 12-month treatment study. We've just submitted it for publication. It was a randomized single-blind study where we combined 6 different nutritional and dietary treatments together. And what we found is that the kids with autism are developmentally delayed. So over the course of 12 months, they make progress, but they don't generally make 12 months of progress. So our non-treatment group gained 5 months of development. Our treatment group, during the same amount of time, gained 22 months of development. The treatment group gained 7 points of IQ. The non-treatment group gained 0 points of IQ. This just shows all the different symptoms that were improved. I'll skip it over. Of the 6 different treatments we used, the top 3 were the vitamin mineral supplement, which we created, and we keep improving with each study. After each study, we measure pre and post levels of vitamins and minerals. So in this study, 80% of the families found benefit, higher percentage than with the older version. Nordic Naturals fish oil, which we, again, used at a much higher dosage than have been used in other studies, very well tolerated and beneficial. And the third treatment, almost as well rated, healthy, gluten-free, casein-free diet. And so there's information there on our nonprofit. Forgive me for a plug for it. And then just to summarize, what I've tried to get home to you is some people will say that everything I've recommended is alternative medicine. I would say nonsense. This is basic nutritional biochemistry. We know what the body needs. We know it needs protein. We know we need fruits and vegetables for vitamins and minerals. We have studies to show that we have problems with these in kids with autism, and we have data to show there's benefit after treating. So I think that considering these treatments, starting with roughly the order I mentioned, and there's a dozen or so other treatments you can read about in the summary here, I hope that will be helpful to you. The last thing I'll just mention is it's so important. Many families try multiple things at once and they don't know what helps. It's so important to do it like a research study. Try just one treatment at a time. Talk with your physician if you're lucky enough to have a knowledgeable physician. In a few cases, there's rationale to consider testing, but try only one treatment at a time and then observe the benefit. There's no one treatment that helps every child with autism. What you want to do is figure out which ones are the children is your child most likely to need. So, thank you.